friends and primitas. I'm Braylon McLean, and welcome back to Let's Talk About It. Oh, I understand. You understand. We are in a different setting. We are in a different environment. I am now a freshman at Howard University. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and give you my Howard intro. Hello, my name is Braylon McLean. I'm a freshman biology major from Atlanta, Georgia. And today we are not having a comfort chat. We are having an uncomfortable chat. We are going to talk about, once again, reproduction and hysterectomies to be specific. We are going to bounce around the topics of hysterectomies, Pan-Africanism. We're going to be talking about minority women's reproductive health issues. We're going to be talking about eugenics and redlining, social engineering, all of the things. So obviously these conversations are heavy. These conversations are hard, but they are necessary. I am not joined here today with Kaylin and Yvonne, as you saw in my last video, but trust me, we are all still very good friends and keep in contact with each other. And hopefully we can get another video together for you guys. Today, just me today. And we're going to be talking about something that is very important to me. When you first saw us, we were rising seniors in high school. But now I feel I've found my calling a little bit more. I would like to obtain a dual MD PhD degree once I get my bachelor's in science to address all of those conversations we were talking about, minority women's reproductive health and issues of the such. So I am first, before we get into the meat of this conversation, I'm going to talk to you about, the people. I'm going to give you the characters. I'm going to give you the historical context. We're going to set the scene for you, and then we'll get into more of the conversation. So first, we start this conversation off with who, who is known to some as the father of gynecology. His name is James Marion Sims. Right. So also, if you see me looking to the side, it's because I have my notes here, my resources and everything. Between the years 1845 and 1849, Sims performed repeated surgeries on the women, what women? Enslaved women, in a makeshift hospital on his property in Alabama. So these were reproductive procedures performed without anesthesia, without anything to subdue the pain, pure knife to skin, performed under the pseudoscientific belief that Black people did not feel as much pain as white people. If you know anything about this channel, if you've watched the previous video, we like to break down the terms. I want to make things very understandable for any viewer. That's my goal, is to make this education as accessible as possible. So I will be giving all of the definitions. I will be breaking anything down. So first, let's talk about the definition of pseudoscience. So pseudoscience is a set of beliefs, practices, or claims that are presented as scientific but are not compatible with the scientific method. In terms of the Eurocentric European belief about, this, that Black people did not feel as much pain as white people, I'm going to go ahead and give you a quote from a Lieutenant Colonial Chas Hamilton Smith. Quote, "They bear surgical operations much better than white people. What would be the cause of insupportable pain to a white man, a Negro would almost disregard." This theory, I'm going to give you a little more of a chain, was supported through the theory of polygyny. So, polygyny is the theory that humans originated from different origins. It is the antithesis of monogenism, which is a single origin of humanity. So, polygyny, again from Lieutenant Colonial Chas Hamilton Smith, quote, "This shows not that men are of one species. If it does, animals belong to the same species as man, but that men are of different species." We can go ahead and debunk this pseudoscience before we get any further down the road, right? If we talk about the conversation of science and Africanism actually aligns with scientific facts. In Africanism, we believe that we are related. We have a shared African heritage to unite together, right? What I mean by that, if you're like, I'm not African, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you look at the maps of human migration patterns, if you look at history, you can see that we all originated from the same location. And from there, diverged into different areas of Earth. If you don't believe me, you can do your own research. If you want to hear the scientific belief of monogenism that backs us up, not belief, but fact that backs us up, humans share about 99.9% of the DNA with each other, where the 0.1% difference accounts for phenotypic variations. If you're asking what is phenotypic variation, that's your hair type, your hair color, your eye color, your skin color, right? So your phenotypic expression is a lottery. If you've done any type of science with a Punnett square, you'll understand that if you do just a basic 4 by 4, you have any chance of gaining one of those alleles, right? Or one of those pairs. So that kind of debunks the whole understanding that we are, of polygyny. We are of different species, that we are different races. That is all pseudoscience. We are one race, the human race, and we are one species, Homo sapiens. Okay, so let's move on from this a little bit. As enslaved people, the women could not provide informed consent, so they were continued to sit in this a forced cycle of rape, labor, and delivery. These women were Anarcha, Betsy, Lucy, and he also experimented on other enslaved women. And this forced, repeated rape, labor, delivery cycle was a form of eugenics. So, what is eugenics? Eugenics is the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as phenotypically desirable. At the time, legal systems offered no protection, and a black woman's for black people, and a black woman's worth was tied to them becoming an asset or commodity for slave owners. This is a quote from Thomas Jefferson. Consider the labor of a breeding woman as no object. A child is raised every 2 years, is of more profit than the crop of the best laboring man. Basically saying that if an enslaved woman could produce a child, that child was a commodity. That child was more use of more value of more real estate than actually what they were farming, which is, a crazy concept to think, but that's the eugenics of the time. Being a enslaved person, being someone who was black was considered beneficial to white people because those were heritable characteristics regarded as typically desirable, because now there's a new child that I can enslave, that I can take rights away from, and that I can treat as an animal. That was the logic there. If you think about eugenics, this is not the first time we've seen this. It was slavery, and it was also seen, I would say, pretty popularly, unfortunately, very unfortunately, in World War II with the Nazis, in order to justify their treatment of Jews, disabled people, and other minority groups. If you haven't read Kampf, I would recommend you read it. um, that is what Hitler was essentially talking about, the Aryan race, white skin, white hair, blue eyes. That is eugenics, right? I'm not saying if you have those phenotypes, you are a eugenicist, but saying that those were the desired traits at that time when we're talking of the conversation of World War II and the Holocaust and all of those things. So obviously, this form of eugenics within the enslaved regions continued going until Black people were given basic human rights, were no longer seen as commodities, but a nuisance way. We'll get back into that. What do I mean by a nuisance? So, with the context of how the rape and continued to happen and why it was happening in January 1808, let me go back. Why it was happening outside of just lack of basic human decency. In January 1808, Congress passed the act prohibiting the importation of slaves into the United States. So once this act was passed, it led to the internal rape and breeding of Black enslaved women because they could no longer import enslaved Africans. They had to create their own race of people that they could continue to demean and take rights away from and dehumanize, right? And that is the trauma, the foundation of the African American ethnicity, my ethnicity. Those are the traumas that we were formed and created off of, right? So that's your historical context. Let me teach you about Anarcha. So Anarcha was one of Sim's main subjects that he had tested on. She was treated for leaky urine or vesicovaginal fistula, known as VVF, which is an abnormal opening between the bladder and the vagina. This leads to wetness, discomfort, and infection. So the causes of VVF are obstetric trauma, which is prolonged labor, forceps delivery, and general vaginal trauma. You'll also see VVF a lot in rape cases. So at 17 years old, she had a child, which led to her development of the disease. Anarcha, even after Sims had done everything that he did to her, was not cured and had to seek additional medical treatment after surviving at least 30 surgeries without anesthesia. This is what I'm saying, knife to skin. And these are not just basic surgeries. Once again, he's trying to address this VVF and heal this hole. He is literally going into her body with no anesthesia, right? And if you think that this is not happening anymore, I want to create a timeline for you, but I want to also create a pathway for you. Things like this are still happening in women's health today, not just minority women's health, but all women's health. If you haven't heard of the endometrial biopsy, it is taking a small tissue sample from the uterine lining to check for abnormalities. And it essentially looks like this. I want everyone watching to picture this. They take a hole puncher, and this is the most sensitive part of you, right? This is like right in your uterine area. And they hole punch it and they take out a chunk of skin, a chunk of your uterus. No anesthesia, no medicine. And today it is still offered by choice of the physician, where most choose not to for whatever reason. It still happens and it is still happening. It is not that far removed. Okay, so now I want to take you from that pathway. We go from the 1800s and now we're moving through the 1900s. So after the 14th Amendment was passed, after the Civil War had ended, and Black people were legally given citizenship and deemed as human beings, um, we became more of like a nuisance to white people here. We could no longer be bred as a commodity, but now it's just like, oh, well, they're here taking up space. What do we do with them? So, aside from the lynchings, aside from the murders of Black people in the healthcare field, there was a lot done to sterilize Black women. This was known as the Mississippi appendectomy, which is a term for the forced sterilization of poor Black women in the American South from the 1920s to the 1980s. I want to connect this with social engineering, with redlining, right? The intention of keeping Black people poor so they could continue to sterilize us, so they could continue to eliminate the race, the not the race, I'm sorry, the ethnicity. So social engineering is the use of centralized planning in an attempt to manage social change and regulate the future development and behavior of a society. Redlining is a type of social engineering. What is redlining? Redlining is the discriminatory practice of denying financial services to residents of certain neighborhoods based on their racial or ethnic makeup, intended to result in systematic disinvestment and segregation. So these are all things that they are doing to sterilize Black women, keeping Black women poor so they can continue to sterilize them, keep them in areas where they cannot access so they can take away all access. So we're going to connect this now to what is a hysterectomy. We're getting to the meat now. So, a hysterectomy is a surgical procedure to remove the uterus. There are different types of hysterectomies, but the one that we're talking about today is a total hysterectomy, so the complete removal of the organ. So, a hysterectomy is typically intended for uterine fibroids, endometriosis, uterine cancer, pelvic inflammatory disease, chronic pelvic pain, and heavy menstrual bleeding. So, obviously, this is a very big surgery. It is the complete, total removal of an organ. It is a very how do I even word this? It is the last option you want to have to go to. Um, but unfortunately, it's not that way in our community, and we'll get into that first. But first, we kind of need to talk about how all of the traumas, the pain, the rape, and the lack of choice or option within the Black community would create naturally a sensitivity around the reproductive health, around our bodies, and around our autonomy. Um, because, like I said, do not think that we are far removed from this because it is happening today. I'm going to give you some statistics here and I'm going to list them. It's going to sound exhaustive because it is, right? So, just talking about the topic of PTSD, PTSD is post traumatic stress disorder, a condition of persistent mental and emotional stress occurring as a result of injury or severe psychological shock. So, the perpetuation of sexual violence against Black women has continued, with Black women experiencing higher rates of sexual violence, physical violence, and psychological abuse. Nearly 1 in 5 Black women are survivors of rape in their lifetime, and between 40% and 60% of Black women report being subjected to coercive sexual contact by the age of 18. Furthermore, in the pregnancy section, Black women's pregnancy related mortality rates are 3 times higher than white women's due to multiple factors, including racial disparities for Black women as patients in the healthcare space and lack of access to proper resources to be cared for. Black women also have a 43% higher risk of miscarriage compared to white women, according to a 2021 study in The Lancet that analyzed 4.6 million pregnancies. Talking about PCOS. PCOS has hereditary components, with women with PCOS being more likely to have family members who also have the condition or other reproductive issues, but it is heavily influenced by environmental factors and has a complex pathway of inheritance. PCOS is a factor of reproductive traumas from childhood trauma and is linked to a risk of reproductive and mental health issues like miscarriage, preeclampsia, and diabetes. The statistics I mentioned before supported this. Sexual contact by the age of 18 and having childhood trauma, PCOS, right? Mental health issues and miscarriage, PTSD, and 43% higher rate of miscarriage. There's a pathway here. You need to see it. There are genetic links also between PCOS and PTSD, and studies show higher rates of mental health disorders like depression and anxiety in women with PCOS. Black women have a higher risk of PTSD due to factors like disproportionate exposure to trauma, racial discrimination, and interpersonal violence, which has a deep relation to socioeconomic status and trauma exposure. That goes back to our redlining. We are more prone to have PTSD because of being kept in spaces where poverty and rape and violence is continued and perpetuated. And then on top of that, all of the reproductive issues that come with that, right? And I want to point out as well in the Pan African context that these numbers aren't even specific to African American women, but they are an analysis of Black women around 7 countries globally. This kind of speaks to the concept of collective conscious emphasized in Pan-Africanism, that we all share our struggle and oppression. This is what I'm saying, that that pipeline that you need to see, the pathway that we need to see, is that this is not only specific to Black Americans. It's not just Black American women going through this, but Black women all around the world. It is something we need to pay attention to. We need to have a collective conscious. If you don't know where that means, that comes from class consciousness, which is a Marxist, it came from, Marxist theory, that the concept of awareness of our shared interests and challenges. We need to all understand this pipeline. We need to all see it. And that's what where this education comes from. That's what Let's Talk About It is about. We need to talk about this so we all understand that this is something we are all dealing with together. Now, if we are to get more US specific, in one of these studies done, and I'll put it here, compared with white women, Black women were more likely to be younger, to have a higher body mass index, to have income less than $80,000, to not have a college degree, to be unmarried, to be Paris, and to abstain from alcohol and tobacco products while pregnant. And additionally, Blacks were more likely than whites to have Medicaid coverage rather than private insurance and to have had a prior induced abortion. So, all of these factors are key indicators of poverty, and if they're not direct, they're very likely. We talk about income less than $80,000, having a higher body mass index. We actually spoke on this in our last video, how having high BMI, having overweight, being overweight is related to poverty, only having access to fast food and things like that. Medicaid coverage rather than private insurance. These are all things that are important to note. And then when we talk about hysterectomies now, studies show that Black women have a higher risk of surgical complications and in-hospital mortality after hysterectomies and other procedures. However, Black women are still more likely to undergo a total abdominal hysterectomy, which is more invasive and has higher risk than minimally invasive surgeries or proactive care or anything like that. Black women in the South receive hysterectomies at rates 3 times higher than white women. When you talk about all of these things, when you talk about social engineering, redlining, and other methods of limiting and withholding the Black community, we can follow the train of thought. Black people are generally pushed into spaces that heighten social disparities and increase the number of Black children that are pushed into those areas. It is a cycle. It is a cycle of trauma. I don't know if you've heard of generational trauma, but this is an example of it, right? And with hysterectomy being a common solution for conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, and cancers, it is important once again to note that these are a finalizing major surgical decision that should only be a last resort option, yet are offered so frequently and are more likely for Black women to undergo them. And that's not by chance. It's not by chance that this is happening. As a person, you can be conscious, right? Of how do I stop the perpetuation of this trauma? Am I bringing a child into an environment that I cannot sustain a healthy quality of life, standard of life for them? How am I taking care of myself, or in what ways am I taking care of myself that I don't um, trigger the predispositions that are already in my bodies. Those are all things that we need to think about. And in our collective conscious, we need to understand that there is unity in Pan Africanism. There's unity in understanding that your struggle is shared with women around the world, with Black women around the world, with other minority groups. It is important to know that. And that's where, the path to liberation comes when you are conscious of the things that are being done to limit you as a people, you can then retaliate. And it doesn't have to be on a big grand scheme. For me, my pathway to help liberate me and my people is to become a geneticist and become a gynecologist and address these things. And I don't want to be the type of doctor who only addresses issues after they happen, but I'd like to address those issues proactively, has a job and a task that they can do to help towards that path of liberation for Black people and other people of color who would like to join that cause. So this is unfortunately, where we're at now. This is the end of that story. These are things that are happening currently. We've walked through the timeline from the 1800s now to the 2020s, and we're still in the time where Black women are being treated unfairly in the healthcare space as patients and as medical professionals. We talked about before in our last video about healthcare gaslighting, and we talked about how there are so many issues that need to be addressed, but we can educate each other one by one and moment by moment. And it's important conversations to have. So just my little send away is that I'd like you to, if you stayed to watch to the end of this video or to the end of this podcast, that you will understand that you have a choice option to know how to go forward with your own health. There's a lot of things that we can't control in reproductive health, but there is a lot that we can. There's a lot that we can control when it comes to having children. How are we going to use contraceptives? Are we using contraceptives? And it is all personal and it is all according to you and the things that you would like to do. But I'd like you to think, how can you regain your choice? The topic of this conversation was the hysterectomy of choice. There's no way to reverse a hysterectomy, unfortunately, but you can stop it from happening to other people who don't need it. You know, there's some people that need it, but I beg to differ that most of them could have gone without it had they had access to the right care. So that is something I'd like to leave you all with. I want to thank you all so, 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 so much for listening. Hopefully, I will be able to make another podcast with Kaylin and Yvonne in the nearby future. But I hope you guys have an amazing and blessed day. Bye, friends and primitas.